before we get into setting up our environment and learning PHP, I want to talk a little bit about what it is and how it works. So PHP is a general purpose scripting language geared toward web development. So PHP doesn't run or get processed in the browser like JavaScript does. It runs server-side just like Python or C# or any other language. Now, as I said, it is geared towards web development. It's important to mention that it is used for other things as well, but I think that the reason it's used mostly for web development is because of its practicality. PHP is interpreted, it doesn't have to be compiled. It can be written alongside HTML using PHP tags. You can load .php files in the browser to make a request from the server. I'll explain more about that in the next slide. And it's often used in combination with relational databases such as MySQL, and we'll learn about that later on as well. PHP is also relatively easy to learn when you compare it to other languages. It was the first language that I learned, or at least learned enough to actually build anything of value. So let's talk a little bit more about how it works. As I said, PHP is an interpreted server-side language, so the PHP code that you write is processed on the server. You can't just write PHP and put the file on your desktop and open it with Chrome or Firefox and have it work. You can do that with HTML and CSS and JavaScript because those are client-side technologies. For PHP to work on your local machine, you have to install PHP itself along with some kind of web server like Apache or Nginx. So this image here I found on phptutorial.net, and I think it's simple enough to understand, and it shows what happens when we use PHP. So we can put a URL in the address bar with a .php extension, just like we would an HTML file. And then what happens is the browser makes an HTTP request to the server, which is running PHP, which then processes all of the code within your PHP tags in that file. And then it sends back the processed HTML to be viewed in the browser on the client. So it's important to know that PHP code that you write is not processed or interpreted by anything in the browser. It all happens server-side. Now, to start developing PHP on your machine, you need to set it up so that your PHP code can be interpreted and ran. And there's a few ways to do that. PHP is often associated with the LAMP stack, which stands for Linux, which is an operating system, Apache, which is the web server software, MySQL, which is a database, and of course PHP. Now, when we say Linux, we're usually talking about your production environment. When you buy hosting, whether it's cloud hosting or like cPanel or something like that, it's usually Linux that it's running on. There are Windows servers, but most of the time you're dealing with Linux. However, for development, you can use whatever you like. So I'm on a Mac. Windows is fine. I feel like for beginners, when they hear LAMP stack and they hear Linux, they think that means they have to use Linux, which is very far from the truth. Now, things you need, such as PHP itself, Apache, a database like MySQL, you can install these separately on your system. But what I would suggest for most beginners are software suites like XAMPP or MAMP. These are suites that include everything that you need, such as PHP, Apache, MySQL. It includes it all in one place, one installation. And XAMPP is what I would suggest for beginners. The X stands for cross-platform, and then you have Apache, MySQL, PHP, and then Perl, which is another language completely. So you also have MAMP and WAMP, which are similar for Mac and Windows, although I believe those are cross-platform as well. And you can also use like Docker. You can use containerization, but I definitely wouldn't recommend that for beginners. All right, and then when you're ready, you can set up your production environment, which will most likely be a server running some Linux distro that has Apache installed on it and everything you need. But I'm not going to get into deployment in this particular video. All right, so you may have seen people hate on PHP, especially online, or probably only online. If I had to describe it in one word, why that happens, I would say ignorance. I think most of the people that hate on it either haven't used it or just want to sound smart or cool by jumping on the bandwagon, or they're people that maybe used it a long time ago, around version 4 or so, and PHP is now on version 8 and has made a ton of improvements. So my advice would be to ignore those people. don't let what other people say get in the way of what you want to learn. If you want to learn PHP, then I would highly recommend that you do that. And the people that say that, it usually seems like it's beginners that don't know much and they just want to sound like they're superior, or it's developers that have only worked on teams at large companies and failed to see the real benefits of PHP, because working at a large company is not the only way to go when it comes to web development. PHP is what I like to call the blue collar language, because it's used a lot by freelancers and small businesses, people that need to get projects out very quickly for clients. I have a freelancing background, so I started with PHP. I actually learned it before I even learned JavaScript and before Node.js was even a thing. Now, there's two really big reasons to learn PHP, in my opinion, and that's WordPress and Laravel. And they're two very different things, but if you know both of these, you can build almost anything. So WordPress is a content management system built on PHP, and it's extremely popular, especially in the world of freelancing. So clients love to be able to log in and edit their content, and WordPress gives them that ability. It's not like cutting edge when it comes to web technologies, when it comes to like performance. But the truth of the matter is, in many situations, that isn't really important. That's why it's great for small businesses that don't need to handle millions of users every day. Where WordPress does shine is in practicality and development speed. You can create things really fast. So if you have like a flower shop where you're building a website, maybe they want to sell a couple products on their website, maybe they want to blog, WordPress is a great fit for that. And it can also be used as a headless content management system where you can build an API with it and then have whatever you want on the front end if you want to use React or some other JavaScript framework. And then Laravel is an extremely powerful framework for building apps and APIs. So for larger and more customized projects, Laravel has you covered in that area. And some people say PHP is a very ugly language because of its syntax, but even people that say that hate PHP still seem to have respect for Laravel as a framework, because it's very full-featured, it's very elegant. If you're interested in using front-end frameworks like React, then you can build your back-end API with Laravel and use whatever you want on the front end. So if you do learn PHP, there's a huge chance that you'll be working with at least one of these, depending on what you want to build. All right, so lastly, I just want to show you what you'll learn and what we'll be doing for the next 3 hours or so. So the GitHub repo is in the description. It'll include all of the code that we write, including the sandbox code and the feedback project. And remember, this is a beginner's course, so if you already know PHP, you're probably going to know most of this stuff, but a refresher, of course, never hurts. But that's it. Let's go ahead and get into it. All right, guys, so I have the PHP Crash GitHub repository link in the description that has all the files that we'll be creating and everything that we'll be going over. So it's basically a sandbox for different files to show you different parts of PHP. And then at the end, we'll build this little feedback project, which will allow us to fetch data from a MySQL database and submit data as well. All right, and then in the starter files folder is the same files, but they're pretty much empty aside from just some comments to kind of help you out. But yeah, so if you want to get the starter files, you can do that, or you can just create the files as we move along. So as far as PHP goes, as I said in the slides, you can't just create a .php file and just run it from your desktop. It's not going to work like that, because PHP is a server-side language, so you need a web server. You also have to have PHP installed on your system, and if you want to use a database like MySQL, you have to have that installed as well. So you could install everything separately and configure it, but if you're relatively new to this, I would definitely recommend using a software suite like XAMPP. So that's what we're going to use. It's XAMPP, and it basically gives you everything you need, such as an Apache web server, PHP, MySQL. It also gives you a tool called phpMyAdmin so that you can manage your database in a graphical user interface in the browser. All right, and there's other ones as well. There's MAMP and WAMP for Mac and Windows, but I honestly don't really like those ones. I've used this for well over a decade. And then, once you advance and you learn more, you can start to get into like Docker and create containers and all that. But for beginners, I think XAMPP is the best way to get set up on Windows or Mac. If you're on Linux, I suspect you know what you're doing anyway. All right, so just download and install it. And if you already have PHP on your system, then that's absolutely fine. But if you don't, I'd suggest installing this. Once you open it up, you're going to see a panel similar to this. It's going to look different on Windows. If you're on Mac, you're just going to want to click Start to start it up. And then under Services, you want to start up your Apache server and your MySQL database. Just click Start. If you're on Windows, you should see Apache and MySQL. I believe you'll see like some red X's over here. Just click those red X's to start up those services. All right, and then if you're on Mac, you want to go to this Network tab and localhost 8080. Just click Enable. So that's going to be your root. On Windows, I believe it's just localhost. You don't use port 8080. And then under volumes, you'll see here on Mac we have this opt/lamp folder. That's going to be our server folder. If you're on Windows, it's going to be in your C drive, and it's going to be in you'll have a folder called XAMPP, XAMPP. So I'm going to click on Explore here, and it's going to show us a bunch of folders here. So all of our Apache stuff, all of our MySQL stuff. Now the main folder you're going to want to focus on is this htdocs. This is your server document root. So any local websites or projects that you create will go in this folder. All right, and if you're on Windows, it's going to be in your C drive, and then XAMPP, and then htdocs. So if we open that up, you can see that XAMPP does have some default stuff in here. In fact, if we go to the browser and we go to HTTP localhost. Now on Windows, it's just going to be localhost. On Mac, it's going to be port 8080 by default. And you're just going to see, I actually have this scaled up right now, but you're just going to see this welcome page, which is actually at localhost/dashboard. It redirects us there by default. Now, from within that htdocs folder, if we create a new folder here, we can name it whatever we want. I'm going to call it PHP Crash. So if I create a folder in htdocs, I should now be able to go to, again, localhost on Windows, localhost 8080 on Mac, and then / whatever that folder name, in this case, PHP Crash. Now it's showing me this because obviously I have nothing in here. So what I'm going to do is open up this PHP Crash folder in my text editor, which I'm using VS Code, and I'm going to create a file in here called index.php. And if I come back over here and reload, we should just see just a blank white screen here. All right, so it's actually loading this index.php file. In fact,